Going Through the Motions, Navigating Loss in GRIS. The indie game GRIS 2018, developed by Nomada Studio, is a meditative, stunning exploration of grief through movement, color, and sound. It stands apart not through dialogue or traditional narrative, but through atmosphere and player interaction. What makes GRIS exceptional is how it uses the video game medium itself, through game mechanics, progression, and aesthetics, to represent the 5 stages of grief based on the Kubler-Ross change curve: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. This essay explores how GRIS expresses grief through medium-specific tools and how those tools intersect with broader cultural understandings of loss. In doing so, it draws on core theorists from game studies and cultural theory to demonstrate the game's emotional depth and cultural significance. Rather than explaining grief, GRIS allows you to feel it. The game opens in a monochrome world where the titular protagonist cannot speak and can barely move. Her limited abilities mirror the helplessness and numbness of experiencing shock during the early stage of grief. Movement, color, and sound return gradually as she regains agency, symbolizing emotional recovery. As Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi argues, games can immerse players in a flow state where challenge meets skill, drawing them into deep emotional engagement. GRIS does this not by being difficult, but by offering just enough friction to demand attention and reflection. Each new ability GRIS gains, from turning to stone to withstand storms to gliding through the air, matches an emotional milestone, translating internal transformation into gameplay. This direct connection between mechanics and emotion exemplifies Ian Bogost's idea of procedural rhetoric, where the systems of a game make arguments. In GRIS, each level is themed around a stage of grief, and its mechanics convey what that stage feels like. Anger is embodied in chaotic winds and environmental destruction, while depression is a heavy, slow, submerged stage in which GRIS struggles to move freely. The game doesn't tell you what grief is. It shows you and asks you to move through it. That's procedural rhetoric in action. Game design as a persuasive and expressive tool. The player's journey through GRIS becomes a form of empathetic embodiment. Johan Huizinga emphasizes play as a cultural activity, something that exists within a magic circle where players temporarily adopt new roles. In GRIS, stepping into GRIS's world invites players into her emotional state. You're not just playing a grieving character, you're grieving with her. The lack of words only strengthens this. Without dialogue, the game becomes more universal, more emotional, more intuitive. It invites reflection without demanding explanation. Despite its surreal style, GRIS communicates something deeply human. Clara Fernandez Vara sees games as cultural texts, artifacts that reflect and respond to the world. In GRIS, the use of color as metaphor taps into shared visual languages. Shock is white, anger is red, hope is gold. The game's palette isn't just beautiful, it's symbolic, and its shifts parallel GRIS's emotional journey. Michelle Lee Brown writes about games as sites of emotional survivance, where healing is represented not as triumph, but as persistence. GRIS captures this perfectly. The game doesn't suggest that grief is something to be conquered. Instead, it presents grief as cyclical, ambiguous, and personal. Healing isn't marked by a climactic boss battle or a final cutscene. It's in the subtle return of birdsong, the emergence of new pathways, the return of Gris's voice. But not as a moment of closure, instead as a subtle continuation of her journey. The choice to avoid spoken language also invites a cross-cultural reading. Shira Chess and Mia Consalvo argue that games can transcend cultural boundaries through effective play, and GRIS is accessible to a global audience because its emotions are embedded in design, not dialogue. The universality of its message lies in its minimalism. That simplicity is its strength. Adrienne Shaw adds another layer with her work on encoding and decoding in media. She reminds us that meaning is not fixed, that players bring their own contexts and interpretations. GRIS doesn't direct its players to feel a certain way. It leaves space for players to find their own meanings in its symbols. The result is a game that is deeply personal yet widely relatable. The structure of GRIS, as it moves through the 5 stages of grief, is rooted in Western psychological models, particularly Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's change curve framework. While this model has been critiqued for its linearity, GRIS resists a rigid reading. The game loops back on itself. Emotions recur. Progress isn't always forward. Colors carry over from previous stages to the next, culminating in a tapestry of emotions at the end. This reflects what Aaron Trammell describes as games' ability to challenge dominant cultural narratives. Rather than showing grief as something to get over, GRIS suggests it's something we live with. Michelle Lee Brown's emphasis on recoding resilience is especially relevant here. In many games, resilience means powering through, defeating enemies, or accumulating strength. In GRIS, resilience is patience, vulnerability, and introspection. That's a radical reimagining of what it means to succeed in a game. This resonates with broader cultural shifts around mental health and emotional openness, as GRIS contributes to building conversations about how we approach trauma and healing. It pushes back against the trope of the stoic hero and offers something gentler and more honest. Bernard Keogh and others have called for a focus on effective play, where games are not just fun but emotionally resonant. GRIS is a fine example of this. The act of playing as GRIS as she fails and tries again mirrors the emotional labor of grieving. There's no big reward at the end, no loot. The game's satisfaction comes from presence and reflection. Even the environment responds emotionally, as in some stages the world may collapse beneath you or push back, while others, it lifts you up. The world is not just a setting, it's part of the character. That's what Miguel Sicar refers to as ethical gameplay, wherein the player is implicated in the emotional landscape of the game. Finally, the interactivity of GRIS is what makes it such a powerful expression of grief. You are not watching someone grieve, you yourself are doing it. You are moving forward, stumbling, pausing, and starting again. That's what sets games apart. As Clara Fernandez-Vara reminds us, interactivity makes meaning in ways no other medium can. GRIS doesn't just represent grief. It allows you, the player, to live it. Ultimately, GRIS is more than a beautiful game. It's a deeply moving, culturally resonant work of interactive art. Through its use of procedural rhetoric, minimalist symbolism, and effective play, it transforms grief into something playable, understandable, and shared. By drawing the player into an emotional journey without words, GRIS embodies the power of games to explore the human condition in subtle yet profound ways. As a cultural text, it offers a quiet challenge to how we think about resilience, emotion, and healing. It invites us to not just understand grief, but to sit with it, move through it, and to traverse its light to the other side.